The studio lights dimmed, but this wasn't just another debate. This was something else, something that felt like history waiting to happen. In the center of a glowing round stage sat two men from different worlds. One, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., wrapped in the prestige of an American legacy crisp suit, composed presence, a lifetime of policy and podiums behind him. The other, Ibrahim Traoré, steady, wrapped not in ceremony but in conviction. He wore a plain tunic stitched, with the emblem of Burkina Faso, and in his eyes, no hunger for applause, just truth. As the cameras rolled and millions tuned in, the moderator barely got through the welcome when Kennedy leaned forward, all confidence. "Let's begin simple," he said. "America leads. We've built a system of liberty, cooperation, opportunity." Traore listened. Then, with quiet steadiness, he asked, "But who gets to live in that system, and who defines what liberty means?" There, it was the spark. Kennedy smiled a little tighter now. "Without us, tyranny would win. We've stood for freedom, fought for it." Traoré's response came like a needle through a balloon. "You fought tyranny in one place, while financing it in another. Our people know your version of freedom. It shows up wearing uniforms, dropping bombs, or tying." Aid to silence, the crowd fell still. The air grew thick-gnawed with outrage, but realization. Kennedy sat taller, his voice sharpening. "We're not perfect, but we've helped build a better world. We've defended human rights, rebuilt broken nations, and left others broken in return." Traoré replied, voice even. "It really helped when the price is obedience. When help becomes control." Now there was a shift. It wasn't a debate anymore. It was a mirror being held up. Kennedy's tone turned defensive. "So it's America's fault your region struggles?" Traoré didn't flinch. "Struggles caused by deals signed in Washington. By rebellions, armed from the outside by debts we never voted for." The studio grew heavier, as if the truth had weighed. It was finally being felt. Kennedy pressed on, irritation now just under the surface. "If not for the West, would you even be here speaking?" Traoré leaned back, tapped his fingers on the desk, a quiet, deliberate pause. Then he leaned in. "I didn't come with your permission. I came because your world can't ignore ours anymore. We're not asking for favors. We're asking you two stop pretending to be our savior." That was the moment the audience knew it. The cameras knew it. Even Kennedy knew it. He tried to recover, so we just walk away, leave the world to chaos. Traoré's reply was simple. "No, just stop confusing order with control. If you don't keep the peace, you keep the leash." It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry, but it hit like thunder. The moderator shuffled her papers, her voice thin and trembling, trying to steer things back. But it was too late. The stage had shifted. This wasn't a polite exchange. It was something raw, real. For the first time in a long time, the voice of the global South wasn't just speaking, was standing tall unapologetically. And the world was finally listening. Viewership was exploding. Every minute, more people tuned in. Online, the first few clips were already catching fire, short bursts of raw truths bouncing across screens worldwide. But inside that studio, the atmosphere had changed. You could feel it. This wasn't tension anymore. This was pressure like the air just before a storm breaks. Kennedy cleared his throat, trying to reassert control. His words came out polished, but carried a new edge. "Ibrahim, I admire your fire," he said. "But leadership isn't about speeches. It's about working with systems, building coalitions, making compromises you clearly haven't had to make." Traoré turned slowly toward him, no anger, just a gaze that cut clean. "I know systems," he said quietly. "I've watched them approve billion-dollar bailouts for failed banks and deny clean water loans for dying children. I know compromise. I've seen what it costs when we say no to your contracts written for your shareholders. not our children. A man in the front row shifted uncomfortably. The moderator said nothing, caught in the gravity of the moment Kennedy tried to change course. But your country has benefited. American aid, infrastructure, medical programs, every one of them came with strings, Traore said, unmoved. Strings that wrapped around our throats. The studio air thickened. And then Kennedy asked with a half laugh, "So what's your vision then? Isolation?" Turning your back on the global community, Traore's face remained still. "No, I want partnership, not pity, not power. Games? And certainly not another seat at your table, one where the menu was written without us. We're building our own table now. One where we don't have to beg to be fed." There was an audible gasp in the crowd. Some clapped softly. Others just stared, caught off guard by the clarity. Kennedy's jaw clenched. "You sound more like a revolutionary than a diplomat." Traore didn't team us a beat. "Maybe that's why I'm still free," he replied. "Because I wasn't taught to smile while being strangled." Diplomats stay silent. Revolutionaries speak even when it's inconvenient. For the first time, Kennedy looked truly shaken. Not because he didn't have an answer, but because the answer didn't matter. Traore had changed the conversation. The audience knew it. And so did he. From the back of the room, a young woman stood and started clapping. Then another, then more. Not out of politics, but because someone finally was saying out loud what so many had swallowed for decades. The moderator tried to speak, but her voice wavered. This wasn't a debate anymore. It was a reckoning. Kennedy leaned in again, holding on. "We can acknowledge our past without rewriting it," he said. "The U.S. has opened doors, borders, education, technology. The world follows us because we lead with values." Traore gave a quiet nod. "And who defines those values?" he asked. "The ones who write the textbooks, own the media, design the rules of the game." "You're accusing America of a moral monopoly?" Kennedy asked, leaning forward. "No," Traore said. "I'm accusing you of moral convenience. You stand for democracy till democracy picks someone you don't like. You stand for freedom until someone uses it to reclaim their oil, or their minds, or their voice. Then it's sanctions, coups, invasions." Gasps again. Some from the audience. Some even from the crew behind the cameras. Kennedy lifted a hand to speak. But Traore wasn't done. "I don't hate the West," he said. "I studied your laws. I know your constitutions better than some of your own citizens. I admired your revolutions, but what I learned, more than anything, is how deeply your ideals disappear when they're inconvenient." Now the room was silent. It wasn't rage. It was truth laid bare. "You call yourself the leader of the free world," he said. "But freedom isn't real if it only applies when you approve of it. That's not leadership. That's control, wearing a nice tie." Kennedy leaned back, exhaling slowly. "Leadership," he said finally, "is about staying at the table even when it's hard." Traore nodded once. "Then let me be clear," he said. And this time he looked directly into the camera, not just through it, but through the lens, through the screens, through the comfortable narratives. "We're not leaving the table, we're flipping it." That line didn't echo. It detonated. Viewers across homes and halls leaned in. Producers whispered urgently into headsets. The crowd sat stunned, witnessing not a soundbite, but a shift. Traore wasn't asking anymore. He was declaring. And the world was listening. Within minutes, the clips were everywhere. Social media exploded. This wasn't just a debate. Had become something raw, something real. And somehow, the moment now belonged to Traore. Inside the studio, it felt like time had slowed. Not a soul shifted. Not a whisper. Just that electric silence when everyone knows they're witnessing something they'll remember. Kennedy leaned forward, more cautious now, like someone trying to diffuse a live wire. "You talk about revolution like it's some kind of cure," he said. But history shows you revolutions often eat their own. They leave chaos behind, not freedom. Traoré didn't blink. No, he said, voice steady. Chaos is what you call it when control slips out of your hands. He looked down at the audience, now not to provoke, but to reveal. When Haiti rose up, you called it chaos. When Congo tried to claim its own diamonds, you called it corruption. When we said uranium shouldn't cost pennies while our people live in darkness, you called it a coup. Now his voice rose just enough to slice through the air. You want to know what real chaos looks like? He asked. It's watching a mother bury her child from a disease we have medicine for. It's holding an election where the winner is chosen in a foreign embassy. It's signing trade deals that read like surrender notes. Kennedy started to speak, but stopped. Something had shifted not just in the room, but in him. He looked. Less like a statesman now, and more like someone watching a curtain finally being pulled back. I'm not glorifying instability. Traoré continued. We tried your way. We copied your institutions, opened our markets, believed your promises. What did we get? Debt, dependency, and polite applause while our homes collapsed. Then he paused, looked Kennedy dead in the eye. You didn't civilize us, he said. You just renamed conquest and called it cooperation. A silence followed, thick, deliberate, reverent. Even Kennedy, for all his training and legacy, sat still. The moderator shifted in her seat, hesitated, and finally tried to cut in. Perhaps we can know, Traoré said gently, never breaking eye contact. Let's not move on. Let's stay here, in the truth. Half the room exhaled audibly. The other half began to applaud soft at first, then swelling. And Kennedy, for the first time, seemed to realize this wasn't just a fiery moment on a broadcast. This was the sound of the ground shifting under his feet. He wasn't losing a debate. He was losing the narrative. Back in the control room, the producers scrambled, waving at the moderator to regain control. But no, not the host, not the audience, not even Kennedy wanted to stop what was unfolding. Kennedy adjusted his sleeve, trying to reclaim his footing. You speak as if everything we've done comes from malice, he said finally. We've helped build clinics, fund infrastructure, support elections, defend fragile democracies. Who've decided they were fragile? Traoré replied. You build a clinic with one hand and sell weapons with the other. You offer aid, and the profits circle back to your own firms. You train leaders, then exile them when they stop obeying. His voice never rose. That's what made it land even harder. This isn't hate, he said. It's not bitterness. It's clarity. We are not your case study. We are not your charity project. We are nations, civilizations, and we are not asking any more. We're defining ourselves on our terms. Kennedy tried to respond, reaching for balance. I'm not defending colonialism. I'm not pretending America's perfect. But corruption isn't only imported. There are problems in your own backyard. Traoré's reply came like a hammer on glass. And your banks store that stolen money? Your lobbyists protect those regimes. Your press looks away until the headlines serve your politics. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Gasps, nods. People weren't just watching, they were feeling every word. Kennedy's voice tensed. So what then? Close yourselves off. Reject every trade, every partnership. No, Traoré said calmly. We'll trade. We'll ally. But not with a rope around our neck. He paused. What scares you isn't our isolation. It's our independence. And with that, the room erupted not with noise, but with stillness. A rare, unmistakable kind of silence, the kind that follows truth too strong to ignore. This wasn't a man asking for a seat at the table. This was a man flipping it over so the world could finally sit as equals. The lights above gave a soft electric hum. Barely audible, like a warning signal no one wanted to name. The moderator looked to the control room, waiting for a cue. The producer just shook his head slowly, deliberately. This wasn't a segment anymore. It was something bigger. And the man sitting center stage in a plain blue tunic, no notes, no earpiece, no sponsors, was holding the moment with nothing but his words. Kennedy leaned in, trying again to steady the ground beneath him. "Let me be clear," he said, his voice level, carefully measured. "I believe in sovereignty. I believe in real partnerships. But what you're doing here, it's dangerous. This kind of rhetoric breeds division, and we need unity." Traore didn't blink. Traore didn't begin tonight. "Mr. Kennedy," he said. "It was just harvested." He paused, let the weight of the silence land, then added, "We didn't invent dependency. We inherited it. Now we're dismantling it. And your discomfort? That's the proof we're succeeding." Kennedy hesitated. You could see at the moment between calculation and instinct. "You speak in absolutes," he said. "Black and white. Villains and heroes. That's not diplomacy. That's theater." A faint smile played at the edge of Traore's lips. "You call it theater," he replied, "because for once the script wasn't written in Washington." A soft ripple ran through the audience. Someone clapped, once nervous, unsure. Then silence again. Kennedy raised a hand gently, trying to slow things down. "Then tell me," he said, "what's your goal here? A new Cold War, another fractured world, East versus West, all over again?" Traore shook his head, slow and calm. "No," he said. "We don't want confrontation. We want correction." He turned his head to face the cameras, not just speaking to Kennedy now, but to the entire global audience. "We want the world to stop pretending there's one compass, one voice, one version of order. The world isn't bipolar anymore, it's multipolar. And those new poles aren't rising to destroy, they're rising to finally define." Kennedy frowned, his tone sharpening. "And when those new poles make mistakes, who holds you accountable?" "We do," Traore said immediately. "When we fail, we bleed. Our errors don't get buried under drone strikes or billion-dollar PR campaigns. They bury our children. And that makes us careful." The moderator finally found her voice again, though it was quieter now, humbled. "This is unlike anything we've broadcast before," she said. "We'll be going to break in." "No need," Traore interrupted gently. "The break already started. Just not the kind your producers planned." The clock in the studio turned red 2 minutes. Too commercial. No one moved. Kennedy stared at the man across from him, suddenly unsure if he was facing a disruptor, a symbol, or something even more dangerous, an idea whose time had finally arrived. Traore folded his hands. "You want accountability, Robert," he said. "Then let's talk about Libya, about Lumumba, about Sankara, about every mistake covered in silence while regimes were toppled and nations carved up in daylight." Kennedy exhaled. "That was the Cold War. We've evolved." Traore leaned forward, voice low and direct. "And yet your military bases remain. Your influence campaigns remain. Your contracts still choke the life out of our economies. So tell me, how much has really changed?" The moderator opened her mouth. "Gentlemen," Kennedy cut in, this time flustered. "This isn't a grievance summit," he said. "You didn't come here to share. You came to challenge. Fine. But don't smear everything America's built with one brush." Traore nodded. "And yet the brush drips." His voice was steady as ever. "From Flint to Fallujah, from Wall Street to Kinshasa. The question isn't whether the brush exists. It's who holds it tanned, who keeps getting painted over." The audience was no longer frozen in curiosity. They were gripped by something deeper. Recognition. And Kennedy, for all his legacy and eloquence, looked like a man suddenly unsure of the room he thought he owned. He tried once more. "You keep saying we, but who is we really?" "A loose alliance of anti-West leaders." "What's your endgame?" Traore finally leaned in closer than ever before. "We," he said, "are the global South. The ignored, the indebted, the resource-rich and power-poor. The ones talked about but never to. And then he delivered the final line quiet, but sharp as a blade. We're not asking for a seat at your table anymore. He paused. We're building our own. Kennedy opened his mouth. But there were no words left, because the room, the audience, the world had already moved on. The red light blinked back on. The camera was live again, but something had shifted. Not just in the studio or the conversation, but in the very air between continents. This was no longer a political program. 'Twas a pivot. A single voice, calm, unapologetic, had reset the rules in real time. What had started as a global dialogue was now something more dangerous. Honest? As the moderator's voice trembled and she tossed to commercial, the screen didn't fade into an ad. It faded into a question. What happens when the people who were never meant to lead start doing it better? Backstage, everything buzzed earpieces, walkie-talkies, hands waving frantically behind control room glass. Some staff whispered about pulling the segment. Others said, lean in, let it burn. Kennedy stood near a water cooler, dazed. He hijacked the whole show, he muttered. No, sir, his aide said softly. He reframed it. On stage, Traoré hadn't moved, still seated, still calm. His hands folded, fingers steepled. No self-congratulation, no swagger. This wasn't about optics. This was strategy. He didn't come for headlines, came to redraw the horizon. The moderator approached, voice hushed. We have 5 minutes left on air. We can wrap it clean. Keep it civil. Traoré nodded politely. Civility isn't silence. She didn't argue. When the show resumed, Kennedy sat back down, but the polish was gone. The rhythm had cracked. His lines felt heavier now, as if they no longer belonged to him. The moderator forced a smile. Final thoughts, gentlemen. One question. What does leadership look like in a fractured world? Kennedy went first. Reaching, recovering. Leadership means responsibility, he said. It's facing your flaws, staying open to alliances, promoting peace through strength. That's what it's always meant to me. Traoré nodded respectfully. That's one version. He turned to the camera not to debate, but to deliver. And here's another, he said. Leadership is when your people sleep beneath roofs. They own not ones held hostage by foreign loans. It's when your children study their own history, not someone else's version of it. It's when the wealth of your land builds hospitals, not hedge funds. The studio didn't clap, didn't shift, didn't even breathe. Because when truth sits in a room that long, people don't interrupt it, he continued. Leadership isn't about how many flags salute you. It's about how many you no longer need because your people walk tall without them. Kennedy looked at him, not angry, not even defensive, just still. And for the first time, he wasn't responding. He was hearing. The moderator gave a small nod. That's our time. Thank you both. The screen began to fade, but one last moment lingered. Kennedy reached out his hand. Traoré took it. And as he held it just a moment longer than expected, he said quietly, I don't hate your country, Mr. Kennedy. I hate the silence that protects its mistakes. Kennedy didn't reply. He didn't have to. By midnight, the clips had flooded every timeline. Traoré, Ruth's, Zine, Sorch, Ainge, Cochange. 1,000 hashtags, but only one moment. CNN called it unfiltered clarity. Fox called it a soft power, ambush. But no one could deny what had happened. The script had changed. In Washington, think tanks scrambled. In Ouagadougou, people filled the streets not in protest, but in purpose. Not against America, but for something better. Not rejection, redirection. Behind closed doors, Kennedy met with advisors. Do we ignore this? One of them asked. He shook his head. No. Ignoring it won't stop it. The world's shifting. Can't lead by default anymore. Across the ocean, in a quiet hotel room above Manhattan, Traoré sat by the window. No cheers, no champagne, just stillness. The same night sky hovered over New York as it did over Mali, Gaza, Haiti, and Kentucky. One sky, one world. Still divided by pride, but no longer by silence, an aide entered. Another debate. Traore shook his head. No, not another debate. A proposal. For what? Traore smiled. An economic framework. One that doesn't need a green light from former empires. Back in D.C., Kennedy sat alone by a fireplace. His phone buzzed. A message from his daughter. That guy made some good points. You should listen. He stared at the screen for a long time. Maybe leadership wasn't about having the last word. Maybe it was about hearing the next one. And as the first light crept into both capitals, Washington and Ouagadougouan, truth hung in the dawn. The era of inherited power was over. The world wasn't waiting for permission anymore. And neither was Ibrahim Traore, because in a world built on borrowed voices, a new voice had spoken, and it didn't ask to be heard, simply refused to stay silent, not to divide, but to awaken.